Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are on the chapter of riba. One might ask, why would you want to exchange gold for gold? And the answer is there could be many reasons. For example, you have a gold ring and somebody else has a gold necklace. And so you desire the necklace and he desires the ring. So this would be an exchange of gold for gold. And like we said, it has to be of equal measure and on the spot payment. Now in this chapter there are many ahadith and they're all pretty similar, but probably the most all-encompassing hadith which we need to focus on is the one narrated by Ubadah ibn Samit, where he narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر والشعير بالشعير والتمر بالتمر والملح بالملح مثلا بمثل سواء بسواء يدا بيد فإذا اختلفت هذه الأصناف فبيعوا كيف شئتم إذا كان يدا بيد. He said, gold to be exchanged for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dried dates for dried dates, salt for salt, like for like, equal measure for equal measure, hand-to-hand exchange. But if these categories differ, then sell them however you wish, as long as it is a hand-to-hand exchange. That is to say, on-the-spot exchange. So that is to say, no deferred payment. In this hadith, 6 types of ribawi items are mentioned, as you have just heard. And so the maxim of riba is that if you have 2 types of ribawi items of the same type, so let's say salt for salt, or gold for gold, and so on, the types that you just heard in the hadith, if they are of the same types and you're exchanging them, then it must be, number 1, a hand-to-hand exchange, so on the spot, no deferred payment, and the second condition is that they must be of equal measure. So 1 sa' of dates for 1 sa' of dates. Notice here the quality of the dates does not matter. So this is a case where quantity matters, not quality. Now as far as the gold and the silver are concerned, the dinar was the gold coin and the dirham was the silver coin. We can make analogy and say that the same rule would apply to the currencies that are used in the different countries in this day and age. So if somebody is exchanging pound for pounds, let us say a £5 note for 5 £1 coins, then this exchange needs to be equal for equal measure. So £5 for £5. You cannot do £5 for £6. And it must be a hand-to-hand exchange. There must be no deferred payment. There must be none of this, I'll give you £5 note today and you can give me £2 coins today and the rest of the £3 in coins tomorrow. No, that would be riba, because it is deferred payment. And remember, the one who defers the payment, the favor is on his side, and you're not allowed any advantage when exchanging ribawi items. Some scholars even said that analogy is not made, and that this money that you have nowadays, in terms of the coins and notes, they are like trade products or commodities. Hence, if we say they're trade commodities, then even zakah would not be applicable on this money unless you plan to sell it, and no riba would run on it either. But this statement is weak, so that opinion is very weak. What we say is that the currency nowadays does take the same ruling as the gold and silver. However, if you're exchanging pounds for euros, then the tamathul, or the equal measure, does not need to be respected. So you can have £5 for 3 euros. So 5 is not equal to 3. That is permissible because they're not of the same type or category. Pounds and euros are different categories. However, it must be an on-the-spot exchange. So we say whenever anything is used to measure the price of something, so it is used as payment or a price for something, then a riba runs on it. In certain cultures, back in the day, they used to use feathers as currency. So feathers would have riba running on them. Now this narration which we have quoted from Ubadah ibn Samit, which we have said this is the pivotal narration because it really includes all of the rules that we need to know about riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'a, and it also deals with the types of items which are ribawi. The story is that Muawiyah radiallahu anh was the Khalifa and he gained some spoils of war, and from the spoils there was a silver cup. And so Muawiyah ordered a man to sell this silver vessel and give the payment to the people, that is to say the soldiers. So that is to say, the soldiers will take their spoils of war from the price of the silver vessel. Now upon hearing this, Ubadah objected, and the reason why he objected, as stated in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, is because the silver was being sold for more than its weight. So the silver was being sold for silver, but not in equal measure. And that is what led Ubadah ibn Samit to quote the hadith you have just heard previously, that selling silver for silver must be in equal measure. So this objection reached Muawiyah, and he stood up, addressing the people. He said, "What is the matter with people, that they narrate from the Prophet that which we have not heard, nor saw the Prophet do, yet we lived in his company?" And thereupon Ubadah ibn Samit said, after repeating that narration, he said, "We will definitely narrate what we heard from the Prophet, even if it may be unpleasant to Muawiyah." And without a shadow of doubt, the truth here is with Ubadah ibn Samit. Muawiyah's argument is about as weak as you can get. Just because you did not hear a hadith from the Prophet, nor saw the Prophet perform that particular action, does it mean the Prophet never uttered these words? The only way that assertion can be justified is if you can demonstrate that you have heard absolutely everything the Prophet ever said during his prophethood. But then, which companion could make that claim? And we also take the great lesson is that you do not compromise on your principles, and you remain firm. As long as you know that the hadith is authentic from the Prophet, you must remain firm against any obstacles. So based upon what we've heard, if someone exchanges wheat for salt, then we say they do not have to be in equal measure, but they do have to be an on-the-spot exchange. Yet exchanging salt for salt must be both in equal measure and on-the-spot exchange. A question we ask is that, can we make an analogy on these 6 items in the hadith? Most scholars do make an analogy, but they differ as to what the illah for the analogy is, that is to say the justification. And so you can have different opinions on the matter. One such an opinion is that anything which is measured using the mikyal, so these food items which I mentioned, 4 of them are measured using the mikyal, so they're measured by sa', then anything which is measured by the sa' and is a food item, then it is ribawi. As for the gold and silver, then the illah is the thamaniya, it is a price which is paid for goods and services. So upon that, pounds and euros and so on would take the same ruling by way of analogy. We could say the same thing with the mawzoon as well, that which is weighed and is a food item, such as meat. So meat for meat would be a ribawi exchange. That would mean that you need to exchange equal for equal and on-the-spot payment. But meat for barley, let's say, the illah here is different. One is makil and the other one is mawzoon, weighed. So now there are no restrictions. You can have delayed payment and you do not need to have them in equal measure. Of course that's impossible because one is weighed and the other one is measured using the mikyal. So of course the equal measure is not possible anyway. We have another narration where a man called Abu al-Minhal asked al-Bara ibn Azib, the famous companion, about exchanging currency for currency, and he said, "Ask Zayd ibn Arqam, because he has more knowledge about this matter." And so he says, I asked Zayd ibn Arqam, and Zayd ibn Arqam said, "Ask al-Bara ibn Azib, because he has more knowledge than me." So they're each referring Abu al-Minhal to the other person. And then in the end they both gave a verdict that the Prophet forbade selling silver for gold in a deferred payment. So basically it has to be a hand-to-hand, on-the-spot exchange. The lesson to be drawn from this narration, quite apart from the lesson of the riba, is that these companions, al-Bara ibn Azib and Zayd ibn Arqam and the like, they would be afraid of giving a fatwa. They would always refer the questioner to somebody else, because if you're giving a fatwa, then you're taking a risk, because if you give the wrong answer, then you are responsible for misguiding someone else. And if you know that you do not have full knowledge on the matter, then you need to be very, very cautious and always play it safe, because you will be guilty otherwise of speaking without knowledge. And this is warned against in the Quran, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and that you should say against Allah that which you do not know. Let's move on to another chapter about selling a gold necklace studded with pearls. This narration from Fadala ibn Ubayd. He says, on the day of Khaybar, when the Muslims conquered Khaybar, he says he bought a necklace for 12 dinar. So dinar, of course, being the gold coins. The necklace was made of gold and was studded with pearls. He says, I separated the gold from the pearls and found the gold to be worth more than 12 dinar. And I mentioned this to the Prophet, and the Prophet said that the necklace should not be sold unless it is first separated. Now we know that exchanging gold for gold must be done in equal measure, and we call this mumathala, be it equal in weight or in measure or in number. There must be mumathala, mithl. But if the gold is studded with other pearls and you sell it for equal weight, then of course the gold does not weigh equally because the other substances will increase the weight. And so the Prophet told him to separate the necklace out so you know how much exactly the gold is and how much the other ingredients are, the pearls and so on. So if you want to exchange the gold for gold, you're able to have the mumathala, because then the pearls will not interfere in this weight. The ulama call a situation like this muddu ajwa wa dirham. A mud is a measure, that is how much you can fill in both of your cupped hands, and ajwa is a type of date. So a mud of an ajwa is how many dates you can fill with both your cupped hands, and we're talking about average size hands. And a dirham, of course, is a currency. And this is to say that you exchange a mud of dates and a dirham for, let's say, 2 darahim. Though it ought to be said that the hadith of Fadal ibn Ubaid and his necklace is not exactly muddu ajwa wa dirham, because the gold in the necklace was worth more than 12 dinar. It would be a case of muddu ajwa wa dirham if the gold was worth less than 12 dinar, because in that case what you would be exchanging is, let's say, gold in the necklace worth 10 dinar with some pearls, and exchanging that for 12 dinar. Yes, this is a case of muddu ajwa wa dirham. But because the gold in the necklace was worth more than 12 dinar, then this scenario does not accord with the muddu ajwa wa dirham. This is just an observation, not that it changes the ruling of muddu ajwa wa dirham. So is such a transaction permissible? The fuqaha have disagreed. Some scholars said it is not permissible to sell a mud of dates and dirham with 2 darahim, even if the amount of dates being exchanged are of the same measure. They say this, yet if you were to sell these individually, a mud of dates for dirham in one transaction and then in a separate independent transaction, a dirham for a dirham, if you were to do this in 2 separate transactions, nobody will argue that this is halal. Yet they say if you bring them together, it becomes haram. But if the transactions will be halal independently as 2 different transactions, then they ought to be halal just all in one go, because all you're doing is simply saving time. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that if one person, to say, has 2 mud of dates and another person has 1 mud of dates and 1 dinar, then this exchange is permissible as long as the extra mud of dates which the first person has is exactly equivalent to 1 dinar. Because this would be simply like saying they exchange 1 mud of dates each, and that's permissible. And then in a separate independent transaction, so a second transaction, they exchange the other mud which the other person has for the dinar of the second person. And of course that is allowed as well. So if both of these are allowed together, then you can just save time and put them all into one transaction, and that makes sense, and there's nothing to say that this is haram. And there is no hila involved in this either. Now the hadith of Fadala ibn Ubaid does not prove that if the gold are of equal measure, then such a transaction is not permissible. You see, the Prophet told him to separate out the gold and the pearls, because he found that in the necklace, the gold was worth more than 12 dinar, and he paid 12 dinar for the necklace. So what took place was a gold for gold exchange, but not in equal measure. And so similarly we can say if a person has a mud of wheat and a dinar, he exchanges these 2 for a mud of rice and a dinar. This would be permissible, because if you were to exchange a mud of wheat with a mud of rice in one transaction and then 1 dinar for 1 dinar in a second transaction, both of those transactions independently would be halal. So putting them together is also halal because no haram comes out of it. And this is not a hila to make the haram into halal. In fact, Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim go a step further. They say that supposing you have a small amount of gold, say worth half a dinar, but this gold is manufactured into a necklace, which is obviously valuable. because it can be worn as opposed to just a chunk of gold. Now this necklace worth half a dinar is sold for 1 whole dinar. Is this permissible? Well, on the face of it, 1 dinar being exchanged for half a dinar is clear riba, but they say no. In a case like this, it is permissible. Why? Because this half a dinar had some service done to it, which made it into this necklace which is useful for people, as opposed to just a chunk of gold. So if you exchange this necklace worth half a dinar in gold for 1 whole dinar, so that means you're taking an extra half a dinar, of course, but they'll say that this extra half of dinar can be taken in exchange for the services put into this half a dinar to make it into a necklace. One may argue back against this opinion by saying that the hadith of Bilal ibn Rabah, where in Khaybar he exchanged 2 sa of poor quality dates with 1 sa of high quality dates, their price or their value would have been equal, but the Prophet called it Ainul Riba. It is the essence of the riba. So the quality does not matter. And so in our situation here, again, the quality ought not to matter. The necklace being manufactured definitely may well have a higher value, but if you exchange it for a different amount of gold, then you do not have a tamathul, which would make it into riba. So it would be the same thing. It would still be riba despite the quality. So we basically make the analogy with the dates in the hadith of Bilal. But Shaykh al-Islam answers back by saying that the difference in quality of the dates were from Allah Jalla wa Ala. He's the one who created the dates. Whereas the difference in quality in our necklace example is man-made, and man does not want his efforts to go to waste. Whereas this opinion is well argued and does have some rationale to it, practically speaking, it would be difficult to give a value to the amount of work put into the necklace. So how would we know that the extra half a dinar in our example given is equal to the work put into this necklace? So in other words, the extra amount being paid may be worth more than the labor, or it may be worth less. How can one possibly decide? It is very difficult at the very least. So we think that it is best not to take this option and just to stick to the strict text, which is to say that you must have a tamathul, so like measure for like measure. And so it's all about quantity and not about quality. And then besides, in the story of Ubadah ibn Samit and Muawiyah was selling the silver container for silver coins. And so you see that the container has had some human effort put into it. That's why it's made into a container. And he was selling that for just silver coins. And yet, Ubadah ibn Samit objected. So the opinion of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah and those who follow him is weak on this matter. So what about the case where one has gold and he wants to purchase a gold necklace? In doing so, if the gold amounts are not the same, from both parties of course, remember at-tamathul is a condition, then in a case like this we say the easy option is you take your gold and exchange it for currency, be it pounds, euros, darahim, whatever, just something non-gold, and then with this currency purchase the necklace. Very simple. However, we must immediately add here that when we say you can sell your gold for darahim, let's say, it must not be from that very same person you're going to take the gold necklace from, because otherwise it will resemble bay'ul ina, which is haram. What we say is that if you want to exchange your gold for darahim, go to another vendor and exchange your gold for darahim from him, then come back to the other vendor who's selling you the necklace and exchange your darahim for the necklace from him. Because if you do it all with the same vendor, then it will resemble the bay'ul ina that we spoke about. Remember, that item is just a little device to make the riba transaction happen. Unless it be the case that it happened non-intentionally. So let us say he exchanges his gold for darahim from vendor A. And then with the darahim he goes and looks for a necklace. He doesn't find it anywhere, but he does find it with vendor A. And he purchases this necklace from him. So it just so happened that he exchanged the darahim and the necklace from the same vendor. It just so happened to be like that. It was not intentionally done. So that is fine, because there is no blame or suspicion of riba. But as for if you intentionally do that, then no. The next chapter is about selling food like for like, at-tamathul. Let's take this hadith from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri and Abu Hurairah. They say that the Prophet deputed a man from Banu Adi to collect a revenue from Khaybar. He came with some fine quality dates, and the Prophet asked, "Are all the dates of Khaybar this fine quality?" And the man said, "No, we exchange one measure of fine quality dates for 2 sa' or 2 measures of poor quality dates." And upon this the Prophet said, "La taf'alu, do not do that. وَلَكِنْ مِثْلًا بِمِثْلٍ, but rather there should be tamathul, like for like amount. أو بيعوا هذا واشتروا بثمنه من هذا وكذلك الميزان." So he says there should be like for like exchange, or what you can do is that you can sell these poor quality dates and with the price purchase the fine quality dates. And likewise you do with those things which are weighed, because dates are not weighed, they're measured using the mikyal. So this hadith is clear. It is the quantity, not the quality. And if you have poor quality dates and you want to exchange them for good quality dates, then they must be of equal measure. And if the owner of the good quality dates does not agree, then what you want to do is to sell the poor quality dates to another vendor, and then with the price come to this vendor of the good quality dates and purchase the good quality dates with this money. We take a vital lesson from this hadith is that if you're going to close off the door and make something haram, open up a halal door. That's exactly what the Prophet did here. He gave them a halal alternative. Similarly, where Allah Jalla wa Ala says, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqulu ra'ina wa qulu unzurna." O you who believe, do not say ra'ina, rather say unzurna. And this is because the Yahud would use this word ra'ina, but in their language it would be a type of insult. So it would be double speak from the Yahud. So do not imitate them. So when you make something haram, give a halal alternative. Similarly, in the authentic hadith, لا تقولوا ما شاء الله وشئت بل ما شاء الله وحده. Do not say what Allah wills and you will, but rather you should say what Allah alone wills. So you make something haram, but then you open up a halal door. And the hadith says, likewise you do for that which is weighed. Ribawi items are food items which are weighed, like meat, but they can also be things like gold and silver. In those days they were weighed as well. We may also take that eating and drinking some luxury food is not haram. In another wording of the narration, the Prophet ordered them to return this. So because this transaction was a ribawi transaction, you had to return it. And likewise with all transactions which are fasid, the goods must be returned and the price must be returned. Also in the chapter, Abu Nadra reports that he asked Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Umar about exchanging gold for gold and silver for silver, and both of them said that this is halal, it's permissible to do as long as it's on the spot exchange. So they were of the opinion that even selling 1 dinar for 2 dinar is permissible as long as it's on the spot. And this is due to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in the chapter, إِنَّمَا الرِّبَى فِي النَّسِيئَةِ. Riba is only in deferred payment. So both of these illustrious companions held the view that exchanging 1 dinar for 2 dinar to be paid later is haram, but 1 dinar for 2 dinar on the spot is halal. So Abu Nadra says that he was sitting in the company of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, where he mentioned this mas'ala to him, and Abu Sa'id said, but if they add on top of that, so if there's no tamathul, then it is haram. Abu Nadra did not accept this opinion of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri because Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Umar allowed such a transaction. And so in response, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrated the hadith of the dates of Khaybar, which you have heard just right now, because in the hadith of the dates of Khaybar, there was a 1 sa' for 2 sa' exchange. It was on the spot, and yet the Prophet called it riba. And so after that, when Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar came to know of this knowledge, then they changed their minds on the matter. We still have to answer this hadith, إِنَّمَا الرِّبَى فِي النَّسِيئَةِ. Riba is only in deferred payment. And we would understand it to be that the interest of the ultimate type is in deferred payment, because that was the interest of the people of Jahiliyyah, is that you pay me more at a later date. And riba al-fadl does lead to a nasi'ah, because if you're going to pay more, then it would make more sense to pay more at a later date, so as to give you more of an advantage if you're paying more. So riba al-fadl can lead to riba al-nasi'ah. Also in the narration, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, when he was told that Ibn Abbas allows riba al-fadl, he says that we will write to him regarding this. And this is obligatory, to write to each other, to communicate with each other about a matter where another person does not have knowledge. Also, we find interestingly that Abdullah ibn Abbas acknowledged that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri is more knowledgeable about the Prophet's hadith than he is. And this is no surprise. Ibn Abbas was just in his adolescent years when the Prophet died, whereas Abu Sa'id al-Khudri was far older. So he is from the senior Sahaba, whereas Ibn Abbas was from the junior Sahaba. And in acknowledging that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri has more knowledge, actually Ibn Abbas shows that he is a man of knowledge. Why? Because a true man of knowledge will recognize other people of knowledge, whereas a man of ignorance will not recognize true people of knowledge. It takes a man of knowledge to recognize a fellow man of knowledge, just like in any other field. Another way which we can understand the hadith إِنَّمَا الرِّبَا فِي النَّسِيئَةِ is if the types are different. So wheat for barley. There's no riba al-fadl here, but there is only riba al-nasi'ah. This is a second interpretation which we can give. Also, in the nasi'ah, deferred payment, even if the quantities are of the same amount, let's say £5 for £5, then a delay in payment is impermissible, as we have said before. One might ask, why is this the case? As long as the quantities are equal, where is the increase? We know that when you delay a payment, that is your advantage. Do you not see that if you purchase something and pay in installments or pay at a later date, normally the vendor increases the price? Why would he increase the price? Because in delaying the payment, this is your advantage. So he wants to counteract that by increasing the price. Whereas, if you were to pay him right there on the spot, you end up paying him less, because you do not have that advantage. So in delaying the payment between two ribawi items, we do not want anyone to have an advantage. This is the idea. There must be equality. And this is one of the few places in Islam where there is equality. And so because of this, we do not want anyone to have an advantage. Therefore, you are not allowed to delay the payment so that both the parties are on equal footing. And then besides, making delays will only lead to riba al-fadl, because then the one making the delay would have an advantage. Therefore, the other party will say, no, you have to then give me more than what you're already giving me. And that will lead to tafadul. So nasi'ah can lead to tafadul, and tafadul can lead to nasi'ah. They can both lead to one another. The next chapter is about the curse on the one who consumes riba. From Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he says, لَعَنَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ آكِلَ الرِّبَا وَمُؤْكِلَهُ وَكَاتِبَهُ وَشَاهِدَيْهِ وَقَالَ هُمْ سَوَاء. He says the Messenger of Allah ﷺ cursed the consumer of the riba, the one who gives it to others to consume, so that is the one who pays it, also the one who records this transaction, and the two witnesses to this ribawi transaction. And he said they are all the same. So as for the one who consumes it and the one who pays it, then this is clear enough, they're directly involved with the riba. But also the one who writes it down and the one who witnesses it, because they are helping this cause. And if it wasn't for them, then perhaps this riba transaction would not go ahead. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Do not help each other in sin and transgression. So keeping company with evildoers is not permitted, even if you are not doing the actual evil yourself directly. If you keep company with them because you forgot, then Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِمَّا يُنْسِيَنَّكَ الشَّيْطَانُ فَلَا تَقْعُدْ بَعْدَ الذِّكْرَى مَعَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. If it is the case that shaitan makes you forget, then do not keep company with the wrongdoers after you remember. What does la'na mean? It's translated to curse, but it means when Allah Jalla wa Ala banishes you or removes you far away from His mercy. And it ought to be known that apart from shirk, no other sin is comparable in punishment to riba. It's the only sin where you have to take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger. Let's move to the next chapter about accepting that which is lawful and abandoning the doubtful matters. From An-Nu'man ibn Bashir, he says, pointing to his ears, that I heard the Messenger of Allah say. So he's pointing to his ears to emphasize that his ears heard it. So the Prophet said, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنْ وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنْ وَبَيْنَهُمَا مُشْتَبِهَاتٍ لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. The halal is clear, the haram is clear. Between them are doubtful matters. Many people do not know about them. فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. So whoever stays clear from the doubtful matters, then he has safeguarded his deen and his honor. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. And whoever falls into the doubtful matters has fallen into the haram. كَالرَّاعِي يَرْعَى حَوْلَ الْحِمَى يُوشِكُ أَنْ يَرْتَعَ فِيهِ. Just like the shepherd, he grazes his flocks near private pasture. He is about to trespass into the private land. ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارم. Behold, every king has a private pasture land, and the private pasture land of Allah are those things which He has made haram. ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. Behold, in the body there is a piece of flesh. If it is sound, the whole body will be sound, and if it is corrupt, the whole body would be corrupt. Behold, it is the heart. This is a hadith which has been called one of the pivotal ahadith of Islam. Islam revolves around a handful of ahadith, and this is one of them. It is pivotal, and it is the main evidence for wara. Wara is when you leave off something for fear of punishment in the hereafter. And zuhud is when you leave off something because it will not benefit you in the hereafter. So zuhud is of a higher status than wara, but in any case this hadith is one of the root evidences for wara, when you leave something in this world for fear of punishment in the hereafter. So this is saying you leave the doubtful matters because they might be punishment worthy. He says the halal and haram are clear. And there are many ayat in the Quran which explain to us that Allah Jalla wa Ala makes bayan to us. He makes clear for us. Bayan is to take somebody out of unclarity into a state of clarity. يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَكُمْ وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ سُنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. He says, يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ أَن تَضِلُّوا. Allah makes clear for you lest you should go astray. Likewise, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. We have sent down to you the book making clear everything. He says, هَذَا بَيَانٌ لِلنَّاسِ وَهُدًى وَمَوْعِظَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is a bayan for the people, making clear for the people. And he says that there are between these halal and haram some doubtful matters which many people do not know. Note, he did not say all people do not know, many people do not know. So there is no such thing that the whole ummah does not know. Rather, the whole of the sharia is bayan, it is clarity. But despite that, because of shortcoming of many people, they do not know about many doubtful matters. In his Al-Fatwa Al-Hamawiyah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that this world is corrupted by 4 types of people. Number 1, nisfu mutakallim, half a speaker. He's alluding to the Mu'tazila and Ash'ariyah because they affirm their aqidah using rationale, not the text. So mutakallim is the one who speaks about matters that ought not to be spoken about. And so the people of the Ahlul Kalam, their speech does not have any barakah in them. They go round and round in circles and they arrive nowhere. So the Ahlul Kalam are those whose aqidah is influenced by philosophical thoughts which are contrary to the text of the Sharia. And number 2, nisfu faqih, half a faqih. A faqih is a scholar of fiqh. And this is because having half a knowledge is like having no knowledge. And so you're going to misguide people with your wrong fatwa. And also nisfu tabib, half a doctor. And that is clear-cut enough because he will destroy the physical body with his inaccurate assessments and medical treatment, because you need to have full knowledge. Half knowledge of medicine is no knowledge. And fourthly, he says nisfu nahwi, half a grammarian. A grammarian is a scholar of grammar. Because again, half knowledge is no knowledge, and such a person is going to corrupt the language when he teaches with half a knowledge. So the point is, many people are ignorant and they do not know about the doubtful matters. And so from this hadith, be aware of those who say that there are grey areas in the deen of Islam. This is an indictment on Allah Jalla wa Ala. It's as if to say He is unable to make the Sharia clear for us, or either He did not want to make the Sharia clear for us. Both of those are statements the weight of which will be unbearable to the speaker on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Rather, as the evidence you have heard suggests, the deen of Islam is clear and there are no grey areas whatsoever. It is in black and white. Yes, it's true, there could be grey areas in your mind about certain aspects. That is true. There are many aspects of the Sharia which are difficult to decide which way to turn. But that does not mean that there is no right or wrong answer. There is always a right answer and all the rest are wrong. But it's just in your mind there could be doubts. But that is due to your shortcoming. So we need to be careful about these matters. And then besides, you find people who utter statements like there are grey areas in the Sharia. They normally have objectionable opinions which they want to try to mitigate. So watch out for people with nefarious agendas. And there could be many reasons why the people do not arrive at the truth. From the reasons, lack of knowledge. Secondly, lack of understanding the text properly. So you may well know the evidence, but understand it wrongly or out of place. Thirdly, following your desires. And there are many people who follow their desires, they make up their mind, and then they try to twist the evidence to suit that madhab that they're trying to follow. So following desires is one obstacle to attaining the truth. And fourthly, an evil intention. It might be that somebody wants to give a fatwa to please the ruler, or perhaps to appease somebody or some people. And this is an intention which has to be rebuked. It is not ikhlas. He's not doing it to attain favor with Allah Jalla wa Ala. So the Prophet says that with doubtful matters, avoid them, and you keep your deen and your honor clear. That is, in the clear. Also we have the hadith, دَعْ مَا يَرِيبُكْ إِلَى مَا لَا يَرِيبُكْ. Leave that which makes you doubt to that which does not make you doubt. This hadith authentically in At-Tirmidhi and others. But interestingly here, he says whoever falls in the doubtful matters falls in the haram. Does it mean that if you do that which is doubtful, you are literally doing that which is haram and so you are worthy of punishment? Or does it mean that falling into doubtful matters is a slippery slope to ending up doing the haram, but it is not the same as doing the haram per se? What is apparent to us is that the second option is correct, because the doubtful matters may be halal, may be haram. And so if you do the doubtful matter, it could be that you're doing something which is halal. That is not the same as doing that which is haram, obviously. But falling into doubtful matters is a slippery slope towards falling into the haram. This is what we understand by the context of the hadith. Because then he goes on to talking about the shepherd grazing dangerously close to private pasture. And it's as if he's going to trespass. And this is a great teaching technique for anyone teaching anything. Use parables and examples, because this will make abstract concepts clear in the mind of the listener. He uses the example which everyone at that time and place could relate to, which is about the shepherd. Private pasture normally has more grass and it is more attractive for the animals. So if you graze near the private pasture, your animals are likely to overstep the mark and trespass. Now the imam or the ruler can take a private pasture as long as he does not harm anyone in doing so, and only the imam is allowed to do that. That is to take a private pasture. And it must be for the benefit of the people, such as for the camels of zakah. And he says that this private pasture which every king has, but for Allah Jalla wa Ala, this quote-unquote private pasture land, are those actions which he has made haram. That is to say, do not trespass into these actions. He says in the Quran, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. These are the limits of Allah, so do not even come near them. And then he informs us that our heart is the ruler of the rest of our body. Yes, it is true to say that we can understand the processes happening in the brain whenever we do things and think things, but these are merely the processes being understood. The question is actually prior to the processes. Why do the processes have to be the way they are? So why is a person thinking the way he's thinking? Why is he doing what he's doing? Surely all of this can be understood how it happens through studying the brain. But why should it have to happen in the first place? Why is this person disbelieving in Allah Jalla wa Ala? It certainly can be explained in the brain. But why should it be like this in the first place? Why is one person using his brain to believe in Allah and the other person is using his brain to disbelieve in Allah? Why should it be in the first place? And the answer is it comes from the heart. And then afterwards, the processes take place in the brain, which can then be studied scientifically. The heart is the king, and all the rest of the body, including the brain, is the servant. Or you could say the brain is like the secretary, which carries out all the paperwork and all the other donkey work of the boss. So it's not about the brain, it's about the heart. If the heart is corrupt, he will disbelieve, and the process can be understood through the brain. And if the heart is sound, he will believe, and the process again can be explained through the brain. We're talking about the thinking process and the acting process and so on. Let us move to the next chapter about selling a camel and making the stipulation that you will ride it. That is the seller making that stipulation. This narration is a famous one by Jabir ibn Abdullah, who was on a journey, he says, with the Prophet, and his camel became tired and weary, and he just wanted to let this camel go. He says the Prophet came to me and struck the camel, And after that, the camel started to run with a speed it has never run before. And then after, the Prophet asked Jabir to sell this camel to him, and Jabir naturally refused. But the Prophet insisted, and he says that I sold the camel for an uqiyah, which is 40 dirham. But he says, I made the condition that I must be able to ride this camel to Al-Madinah. And the Prophet agreed. And then when they reached Al-Madinah, he gave me the money, and I went back. But then after, he says, the Prophet sent somebody to call for me. So I returned to the Prophet, and the Prophet said, أَتُرَانِي مَا كَسْتُكَ لِآخُذَ جَمَلَكَ خُذْ جَمَلَكَ وَدَرَاهِمَكَ فَهُوَ لَكَ. Do you think that I bargained with you just in order to take your camel? Here, take your camel and your darahim, for they belong to you. We can take from this narration that in a sales contract you're allowed to make conditions, just as Jabir did, as long as these conditions in and of themselves are permissible, and most conditions made in a sales contract are permissible. We also find that Jabir's camel was slow, and the Prophet caught up with him. Now the Prophets would travel in the rear end. Why would that be? In order to make sure that no one is being left behind. We can take that you're allowed to let a camel go if it is no use to you. This would not be wasting wealth, because you're not destroying the camel. But this would depend if this animal will be able to graze on the land, because if the land does not have any pasture, then the animal is going to die, and this will probably be a slow death, and you do not want to be responsible for that. So in a case like this, it is better to sacrifice the animal. If it is a donkey, you will not be able to sacrifice and eat its meat, so here you can kill it quickly because it will be better than a slow death from hunger. We find it is permissible to hit an animal in a way so as to not cause it pain, just as the Prophet did there. So you could, for example, strike a horse to make it run faster, but you're not allowed to give it pain, or strike it in an area which will cause it damage, say the eyes, for example. We take that a ruler can trade with those who are ruled. Likewise, a scholar can trade with an ammi. There's no problem in that. We find initially Jabir did not accede to the Prophet's request to sell this camel to him. Was he disobedient? The answer is no, because this is a sales transaction, and you're not allowed to force anyone to sell anything. It is not an act of ibadah such that you have to listen and obey without asking questions. Note, however, a qadi or a judge may not directly involve himself with trade because the people may show favoritism to him in order to soften him up, because he's the qadi, he's the judge. And so he wants to avoid this, and so there's no problem in him refraining from trading directly with the people. We can take that you're allowed to bargain and haggle in a trade, because the Prophet said, sell it to me for 1 uqiyah. So you can bargain and haggle in a trade contract. In a sales contract, you can stipulate a particular benefit, like Jabir did, but this benefit needs to be known. If he makes a stipulation of a benefit which is unknown, so let us suppose he says, I stipulate this benefit until a time where I purchase a house. So this time period is unknown. We do not know when he will purchase this house. So this would be gharar, or uncertainty, because you do not know what you're going to get. You do not know how long the seller is going to reap the benefits from the stipulation which he has made. So in the case of Jabir, it was not gharar, because we knew Jabir made the stipulation of benefit that he will ride the camel to Al-Madinah. That's a known benefit. We may also take from the hadith that al-mumakasa, or haggling, is permissible. This is when you try to reduce the price, and such an act should not be seen as a lowly or base character. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ did it, and he was of the highest character. However, if you know that the seller is selling you this item at its proper price, and he's not trying to increase it at all, then you should buy this item at the proper price and not haggle. So the good character here would be not to haggle. However, if you fear that he is increasing the price unreasonably, then yes, it is perfectly within your rights and within good character also to haggle. And when a man who had sustained some injury on his head used to be duped much, the Prophet ﷺ told him when he complained to him, إِذَا بَايَعْتَ فَقُلْ لَا خِلَابَ. When you purchase something, then you should say لَا خِلَابَ. There should be no ripping people off or deceit. So this type of character would be from your hazm, from your firm resoluteness, such that you are not duped. We also take from this hadith the great and kind character of the Prophet in that he returned the price and the camel back to Jabir. We take that if you're going to give a gift to somebody, then make it clear that this is a gift, so that there's no confusion, because the other person may think you're lending him something and that he has to give it back to you. So make it clear, just like the Prophet said, خُذْ جَمَلَكَ وَدَرَاهِمَكَ فَهُوَ لَكَ. Take your camel and your darahim, for it belongs to you. And also, the one receiving the gift, he does not have to utter words of acceptance. He does not have to say, I accept the gift, or any other such words. Rather, anything which is customarily known to be acceptance, then this is what matters. Because Jabir here did not say, yes, I accept the gift. But the real important question which arises from this hadith is, then why would the Prophet want to purchase this camel for an uqiyah and then simply return it back to Jabir? What did the Prophet plan to achieve with this? It appears what the Prophet is doing here, if we take a look at the whole hadith, remembering that this camel was a useless camel and Jabir wanted to just let it go, and the Prophet struck it making dua, and the camel started to run really fast, and then notice how the heart of Jabir was now suddenly attached to this camel, and the Prophet wanted to emphasize and highlight this difference. Look at how previously Jabir wants to let this camel go, and now all of a sudden he does not even want to sell it. So it is really to highlight this difference, how the nature of man can immediately differ and fluctuate. We also find from other wordings of this hadith that they were coming back from a military expedition, and Jabir told the Prophet that he had got married, and the Prophet asked him, did you marry a virgin or a non-virgin? So is this a general rule that if a brother of yours gets married, that you can ask him whether he married a virgin or a non-virgin? Well, no, this is deemed to be bad manners, as it is nosy behavior, and nosy people are never liked by anyone. But here the Prophet did ask him. This is because the Prophet has much authority over Jabir, just like he does over every other one of his companions. And if he's going to ask a question like this, it is going to be to guide him in this matter. He's not asking him just to be nosy, or asking him just for the sake of asking him, as many people do. So we say from this that a person of authority can ask someone underneath his authority about these types of private affairs, if it is for a useful purpose. We can take from this hadith also that it is better to marry a virgin rather than a non-virgin, if you have the choice between two, and both women are equal in all other affairs. As the Prophet said, أَفَلَا تَزَوَّجْتَ بِكْرًا فَتُلَاعِبُكَ وَتُلَاعِبُهَا. Why did you not marry a virgin so you can play with her and she can play with you? But of course the reason why Jabir gave is because he wanted to marry an experienced woman who would be able to look after his many sisters, and a virgin woman would not have the experience. So this is definitely a valid excuse to choose a non-virgin over a virgin. The father of Jabir, Abdullah ibn Haram, was martyred during the Battle of Uhud and left behind 9 daughters. Another interesting point to note from this hadith, Jabir ibn Abdullah took barakah from the Prophet when the Prophet made dua for the camel and struck it. This is clearly barakah, and you could notice the immediate effects. So this can apply to other people. So for example, if a knowledgeable sheikh comes to your town or your masjid or your house and delivers a lecture of knowledge, then you can say that this is a barakah that the sheikh has brought to our home. That is fine. However, barakah from the physical body, then this is haram, except from the Prophet. So you can take barakah from the physical body of the Prophet. The companions used to take barakah from his hair, from his sweat and so on. This is fine. Only from the Prophet though. From no one else is this permissible. If it had been permissible, then surely Abu Bakr would be the most worthy to take barakah from his physical body, yet none of the companions ever did so. From other words of this hadith, we find that the Prophet actually gave him back more than what he took. And we say it is fine to give back more than what you took if you took out a loan, as long as this excess is not stipulated. Also we find from other wordings that the Prophet ordered Jabir, when they returned back to Al-Madinah, to offer 2 rak'at in the masjid. And this is a forgotten sunnah. When you return back to your hometown, go to the masjid first and offer 2 rak'at before returning home. Also in another wording, he says that I sold the camel for 5 awaq. And in the other wording, as you heard, for 1 uqiyah, which is 40 darahim. And in this narration, 5 of these uqiyah, 5 awaq. Now this difference does not harm, because some people say, well, this hadith now is muttarib. It differs and conflicts with each other, the wordings. But we say, whether it was 1 uqiyah or 5 awaq, it doesn't actually make a difference to the overall rule of the hadith. Meaning to say this difference, or this item of information, how much the camel was sold for, is not pivotal to the hadith. Yes, the problem would be if the difference, or the ittirab, was pivotal to the hadith. We took the hadith of the necklace of Fadala ibn Ubaid. The price of the necklace was 12 dinar, but other narrations have it at a different price. But again, that difference, or that piece of information, the price of the necklace, is not pivotal to the hadith and to the ahkam, or the rules that can be derived from the hadith. So therefore, this type of ittirab does not harm the hadith. Also, we find from the narrations of the same hadith that the Prophet, when he entered Medina, ordered a cow to be sacrificed and ate from its meat. So we find that cows are allowed to be eaten. That's obvious enough from the Quran. But there is a narration in the Marasil of Abi Dawud and others that the Prophet said that the meat of the cow is a disease and its milk is a healing. And this hadith, without a doubt, is da'if and opposes what is known and well established in the Sharia, that the meat of the cow is halal to be eaten as long as it's slaughtered in the halal fashion. A question about the salah upon returning from a journey. If the masjid is closed, is the sunnah waived from you? The answer is yes. This sunnah is done in the masjid, not in the home. Also, if you return after Asr, let's say, which is the forbidden time, can you perform this salah? The answer is yes, because this is a salah for a particular reason. And we have spoken about that before. From the hadith of Jabir, we can also take that ceasing possession of the merchandise is not a condition for the trade to be valid. Yes, you're not allowed to sell the item on before you've ceased possession of it, that's true, but the trade itself is valid even if you have not ceased possession, because the Prophet had not ceased possession of the camel at the time of the trade, and yet the trade was valid. Okay, let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1, state what are the ribawi items. Question number 2, define riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'ah, giving examples of each. Question number 3, if a chunk of gold is worth 1 dinar and you, through your own effort, turn it into a necklace, can you then sell this necklace for 2 dinar, where your purchaser is going to pay you 2 dinar of gold coins, so that this is an exchange of gold for gold? Gold necklace, which was originally worth 1 dinar, being exchanged for 2 dinar of currency. Is such a transaction permissible? State any evidence to support your answer.